Welcome to Dose of Truth. This is Dr. J. Michael Nyota, author, early LA crime historian, and grandson of Los Angeles godfather Jack Dragna. In Dose of Truth, I ever so gently take a Louisville slugger to mob mythology. On this segment, I'm going to delve into a video series called Bloodletters Badmen. So each installment of B&B comes with a byline, researched, written, and narrated by G. Marshall Johnson. This video show is based on the material found in the J. Robert Nash book by the same title, Bloodletters Badmen. Well, I'm going to throw a lens over Johnson's LA video, since I specialize in organized crime in Los Angeles. So let's go ahead and pull the straight razor from the case and start shaving the fiction. As a disclaimer, the Bloodletters video is over 9 minutes long, and there are far too many errors for me to just address in this segment alone. So, instead, I'm merely going to pull its pants down and let you see what they're working with. And you can make a judgment call after that. G. Marshall Johnson boldly contends that gangsters back east and their liaisons on the west coast jokingly referred to the Dragna mob as the Mickey Mouse Mafia, and Jack Dragna was the head mouseketeer. Let's talk about this. Let's look at timelines. Context is a beautiful thing, right? So the phrase Mickey Mouse Mafia, in reference to the Los Angeles crime family, was actually coined by the LAPD and dates back to February 22nd, 1974 in the Tucson Daily Citizen. You won't see any mention of it prior to that, not in any of the crime books, none of the newspapers. So journalists in the Tucson Daily Citizen wrote, noted for their toughness and integrity, Los Angeles police don't suffer buckled knees when they encounter mafiosi. One of them referred derisively to the local hoods as the Mickey Mouse Mafia. So, chances are these members of the LAPD had just seen The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight, which was a comedy mob flick from 1971 that used the phrase Mickey Mouse Mafia on its advertisement posters. And ironically, the movie, which casts a very young Robert De Niro, poked fun at New York's crime families. Even more ironically, however, is the fact that Jack Dragna had been dead for nearly 2 decades before the phrase Mickey Mouse Mafia was ever used to describe that crime family. Members of the Chicago outfit and other mafia families began to follow the LAPD's lead and use this phrase to describe their LA counterparts around 1979.
Sorry about that.
The public would learn about this in late 1980. On November 25th, 1980, the Chicago Tribune talked about a recently leaked telephone conversation that had been picked up on a wiretap. And in that convo, Chicago gangsters refer to the LA family as the Mickey Mouse Mafia. According to the article, the Mickey Mouse Mafia reference was to their California colleagues who, in recent years, have become a source of irritation and embarrassment to organized crime families throughout the country. So why is that? Well, the catalyst kickstarting this negative sentiment can be found in newspapers as well, and beginning around January of 1978. On the 18th of that month, the LA Times stated, James Fradiano, reputed West Coast Cosa Nostra leader, is being moved around the country under the protection of federal agents, indicating he may testify against others in the bomb slaying of Cleveland Rackets figure Daniel Green. Moving forward a few months to April 14, 1979, the Indiana Evening Gazette wrote, within the next year, the Justice Department may decide to let its top underworld songbird, James Fradiano, go public. If he is allowed to sing out, the Mafia will be thrown into a panic. Fradiano, a confessed hitman for the mob and the one-time head of a West Coast family, is currently helping the government in a murder case. He has been described to us as bigger than Joe Valachi in terms of what he knows about mafia operations. Okay, so the Mickey Mouse Mafia comment made by Chicago gangsters was picked up on this wiretap right around that time. They were a little pissed about what Jimmy Fradiano was doing. He was touring the country testifying against their fellow mafiosos. But if you aren't convinced that Fradiano is to blame, a look at the literature might help sway your opinion. Ovid Damaris published The Last Mafioso in 1979. The phrase Mickey Mouse Mafia does not appear in the book once. Mickey Cohen released his autobiography, In My Own Words, with John Pierre Nugent in January of 1975. Before the late 1977 murder of Danny Green, and before Jimmy Fradiano flipped and went turncoat. The phrase Mickey Mouse Mafia does not appear anywhere in Mickey Cohen's book. So why did authors from the late 1980s and on, crime writers like J. Robert Nash and Carl Sifakis, make such bold and unsubstantiated claims? Other than to merely sensationalize and sell books, that is, of course, right? Well, apparently, they capitalized on a catchy phrase that went viral in the mid-1980s. However, lacking any and all semblance of integrity, they took it out of context. So, addressing the press in 1984, LAPD Chief Daryl Gates called the LA family the Mickey Mouse Mafia. He held a press conference following a big bust of the local Cosa Nostra group. That's when it went viral. But Chief Gates wasn't referring to the older regime. He made reference to the organization under its current leadership of Peter and Carmen Milano. Attempts to take this out of context and backdate it and slap the sentiment on this earlier lineup and leadership, as G. Marshall Johnson did in his Bloodletters video, is basically the equivalent of blaming John F. Kennedy for something that Barack Obama did while in office. Give me a break. Getting back to the Bloodletters Badmen, Johnson claims that Jack Dragna was boss for about 12 years during the 1940s and 50s. Well, reputable sources such as FBI files and informants have all stated that Jack Dragna took over leadership from Joe Artizone in 1931 when he mysteriously disappeared. That is the generally accepted view among researchers, authors, and historians. This means that Jack held the position of boss for roughly a quarter century, not 12 years. Johnson also alleges Jack was considered weak and a bumbling idiot by most who knew him. Yet, conveniently, he fails to offer even a single solitary source for this statement. Johnson also wants viewers to believe that Jack wasn't chosen to be boss because he was a mastermind of crime or a good organizer, and that years later, one insider claimed he was simply the best of a bad lot. Bullshit! But again, there are no sources provided. About as in-depth as he gets in the video is offering a one-liner from Carl Sifakis' Mafia Encyclopedia, which stated, "Dragna was a man who thought small." Well, I can't fill you in on the identities of these alleged people that had something bad to say about Jack. There is nothing along those lines in the FBI files covering the early days of Los Angeles.
Fake news!
But what I can do is provide a few examples given by those who actually did know and work for Jack. Sometime in the latter 1960s, a longtime member of the LA Brigade, going all the way back to the 1920s, that being Frank Bompensiero, who became an informant after Jack Dragna's death, he had this to say about Jack and his brother Tom. They were utterly ruthless, domineering, and extremely ambitious. And during this period, the crime family was at its greatest strength. They controlled most of the organized crime activities in the area. Moving forward to a 1984 interview with investigative reporter Dick Carlson and a former Dragna driver named Eddie Cannizzaro. On camera, Eddie had this to say about Jack. He was one hell of a honcho, first-class gentleman, top shelf everything, and he took care of his people. I was glad to be associated with that man. Now going further, Cannizzaro added, I learned things from him, like how to conduct yourself as a man in this world, because he was 100% man. The police thought he was a bad apple, but that was all baloney. So Johnson makes the big mistake that many of the bestsellers in the genre have made as well, stating that Jack spent 3 years in San Quentin prison. Well, if you look at that famed mugshot of Jack, and if you go to the Las Vegas Mob Museum, you'll see it nice and big posted there. And I actually recently got the portrait tattooed on my back. Well, It says right there in the San Quentin registrar, right next to his picture, released for retrial. And if you look at the dates, Jack only spent about 6 months at San Quentin. And yet, I don't know how many books say he was there for 3 years. And according to the FBI files, as you can see I slipped in right here, by the end of that same year, in October, all charges were dropped. Now, Johnson briefly talks about the racing wire. And this is what it says about the racing wire. The NCS looked west and saw the promised land. They wanted a new home for their racing wire to cash in on the gambling at a national level. But they didn't call on Jack Dragna or his crime family to run the show. Instead, they called Bugsy Siegel, and Charles Lucky Luciano made it clear to Dragna not to interfere, or else. Now, I've seen mention of the subservience and ultimatum theory in some of the 1970s crime literature, and in some of the newer books that have cited those older crime writers rather than actually looking at the FBI files, many of which are now declassified. And I'm telling you, these documents are available for free to the public. Check out the FBI Vault or the Mary Farrell Organization. You might actually learn something. That being said, Johnson's claim is a little hard to stomach for someone who's actually read the FBI files of Ben Siegel, Mickey Cohen, Jack Dragna, Joe Sicca, and just about anyone else involved in the LA rackets during this period. Even the crime books going back to 1951 with Burt Turkis and Sid Fitter's Murder Inc. and 1965 with George Redston's Conspiracy of Death have all highlighted that Jack Dragna and Ben Siegel were business partners. Trans-American Wire Service Incorporated, so the National Crime Syndicate could compete with the heavy in the industry, and that was the Continental Press. As you can see here, I've slipped in the FBI files, right? And this nice transposed wiretap conversation between Ben and Jack. The pair were clearly working together. Jack managed Los Angeles, and Ben headed up Las Vegas. Instead of presenting these facts to viewers, Johnson's video instead parrots what a number of other crime writers have inaccurately spouted. When Siegel and Mickey Cohen arrived in California, Dragna hated the idea of playing second fiddle on his own patch, especially when they were pushing for a new wire service for bookies, one of which he would be left out in the dark. Very contrary to this, and supportive of an amicable partnership is Turkis and Feeder's work, which indicated that Jack, a local gambling power in Los Angeles, was Ben Siegel's most valuable asset. And if you look on the far right there, they paint Mickey Cohen in a much less attractive light as the small shot who goes for the sandwiches when the big boys have their hotel room sessions. Hey Mickey, I'll have an egg salad, thanks man. So one of the few times that Johnson's video actually cites a reference, he talks about Ovid Damaris's book, The Last Mafioso, summarizing it. Meyer Lansky made Jack Dragna an offer to buy into the Flamingo for $125,000, and that Dragna tried frantically to come up with the money but was unable to do so. In the end, Dragna wound up with nothing. Many reported that Lansky knew Dragna could not come up with that much cash, and basically they concluded Lansky made him an offer he had to refuse. So, quips aside, although Johnson makes a reference to the book The Last Mafioso, none of the content from that book is presented to his viewers.
Say what?
That's a little strange and misleading. I'm not sure where Johnson dug up the information he provided, but what The Last Mafioso did offer is a conversation between Jimmy the Weasel and Jack Dragna. It went something like this. Listen, Jimmy, Meyer sent word that we can buy into the Flamingo for $125,000. What do you think about it? Jimmy hears this and he gets really excited. He chimes in, it's what we've been waiting for, let's grab it. But Jack's not so sure. Smartly, he's hesitant. He's seen how poorly Ben Siegel managed the construction of the casino and the racing wire, and he likely already knew that his business partners were probably going to blow his head off for the mistakes he'd made and potentially for skimming the profits. So Jack says to Jimmy instead, in that joint, we'd be in the hands of the Philistines. We'd have to take what they give us. Envisioning all the headaches like an awful mother-in-law, he decides to pass, and smartly so. So I'd like to close up this segment of A Dose of Truth, and thank you for chiming in and sticking around. I'm going to close it with a little insight about the author who inspired the series Bloodletters Badmen. So J. Robert Nash has written roughly 70 books on the mob. 70. That is not a testament to the quality of his work. These books are like the A to Z Mob for Dummies Cliff Notes format that are cranked out left and right without any legwork put into checking the facts. Plainly, they're like a gathering of errors all holding hands and singing Kumbaya. In Nash's 1990 lawsuit against CBS, which he lost, the court compared his writing to speculative works representing themselves as fact. Here's a 1995 quote from the Journal of American History. Nash's work contains numerous errors, omissions, inconsistencies, and anomalies. That doesn't sound very promising.
Only Willis was
1997, Roger Lane, he included Nash in his acknowledgement saying, hey, thank you, when he did his book Murder in America. Thank you for being one of my sources. But it came with a disclaimer. Several books have been helpful. He mentioned Nash's often inaccurate, sensationalized, indispensably comprehensible Bloodletters Badmen. That's quite a caveat. In 2006, the Library Journal had this to say: fascinating yet flawed, and they highly recommended verifying all of the data before using any of it for research purposes. Regarding his own work, Nash has stated his books are seeded with information to detect any unauthorized use of duplication. He called this highly unorthodox method copyright traps. Kind of fishy. Where I come from, we would call that CYA, cover your ass. So whenever someone like me comes along and points out all the gangbang of inaccuracies in your work, you can simply holler, "Oh no, that was merely a copyright trap. I knew the truth all along." Alright, there you go. And this concludes this installment of Dose of Truth. Time to go wipe the blood from my Louisville and pour a copa. Be sure to check out my website for updates on new books and television appearances. And please drop by the site shop to purchase any of my new true crime titles. Also, there's links to my Las Vegas Mob Museum lecture and my National Crime Syndicate column, The Early Days of Los Angeles. Thanks for the support, and remember, just a spoonful of sugar helps the dose of truth go down. This is Dr. J. Michael Nyota signing out. Salud.